Crucifixion, one of the worst forms of punishment in history. In 1968, the body of a crucified man was found in an ossuary in eastern Jerusalem, which dates back to Jesus' time. This find was astonishing because archeological evidence for crucifixion is very rare. In fact, this is the only find of a crucified person that dates back to the Roman Empire around the time of Jesus. The body carried a nameplate, a so-called titulus, which was common for victims of crucifixion. On this plate it said, Jehohanan, the son of Hagakol. Jehohanan's body was preserved because he received a customary burial, even though the crucified were usually left to rot on the cross. In the 1980s, the anthropologist Nicu Haas from the Hebrew University Medical School in Jerusalem examined the body of Jehohanan. His work and a critical reappraisal of his results by two scholars called Zias and Sekeles informed the first part of this video. So let's find out how to nail someone to a cross. Because wooden remains were discovered on both sides of the nail, the feet must have been nailed to both sides of the cross separately, not both together to the front of the vertical beam, as representations of the crucifixion of Jesus would suggest. The wood on the inside is olive wood from the beam of the cross. The wood on the outside is different and stems from wooden washers. Popular depictions of Jesus, so-called crucifixes, often show Jesus with nails in his hand and both feet nailed to the front of the vertical beam. However, there would be some issues with this style of crucifixion. Firstly, instead of nails, most records mention ropes with which the victim was tied to the cross. Secondly, according to Mark Benecke, dubbed the most well-known forensic scientist in the world, the nails, if simply hammered through the palms of the crucified, would not manage to support the victim's body weight. Artistic portrayals of the crucifixion might originally be based on a misinterpretation of the ancient Greek word for hand. In ancient Greek, the word for hand is cher, but this word can actually refer to the entire forearm. Practically speaking, there are two possibilities to attach someone firmly to a cross, exclusively with nails. The first is to place the nails exactly in between the two bones of the lower arm, the radius and the ulna. The second possibility is to drive the nail through the palm and the carpal tunnel. Experiments have shown that the main part of the body weight would have been supported by the nails in the feet. Some depictions indeed display a footrest or a kind of seat, which would have helped to support the weight. However, this support would not ease the torture, but on the contrary, prolonged it. The main purpose of crucifixion was not only to torture the victim, but to dissuade the ones who witnessed the procedure from committing similar crimes. As a form of execution, it was designed to provide an agonizingly slow, publicly humiliating, and excruciating death. In many cases, the victims not only suffered physically for several days, but were also scorched and forced to carry the crossbeam, which weighed roughly 45 kilo, about 100 pounds, through the busiest areas of the town. The weight of the beam depended on the form of the cross. Crosses were often shaped like a capital T or like a lowercase letter t. Because it was easier to lift the victim up on the cross with a capital T shape, this shape is said to have been more common. Sometimes a simple stake was used instead of a cross. But dragging a heavy beam across town was not yet the worst part of crucifixion. Seneca the Younger mentions that sometimes a stick was forced upwards through the groin of the victim. In contrast to the somewhat discreet depictions of modern-day artists, the victims were usually stripped naked to make them as vulnerable as possible. Additionally, the crucified was entirely at the mercy of the guards. They would sometimes shatter the leg of the crucified to weaken him and to shorten their guard. This was called crurifragium and sped up the death of the crucified victim. Well, in this context, I guess it's appropriate to say, always look on the bright side of death. According to Muslin and Mitchell, the official cause of death following crucifixion could range from cardiac rupture, heart failure to quote, didn't actually die, end quote. It depended very much on the form and circumstances of the crucifixion, which could vary strongly throughout history. For example, people could be crucified close to the sea during low tide and simply be left there to drown. Death could also be caused by a sepsis following an infection caused by the nails or the scourging which happened before the actual crucifixion. Even dehydration or being eaten alive by wild animals can be added to the list, but most scholars believe that the most frequent cause of death was asphyxiation. The whole weight of the body was supported by its arms, which were stretched out. According to Zias and Sekeles, quote, hanging from the cross resulted in a painful process of asphyxiation, in which the two sets of muscles used for breathing, the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm, became progressively weakened. In time, the condemned man expired due to the inability to continue breathing properly, end quote. The victim would have to pull himself up using his arms to prevent himself from getting insufficient air. Once the arms were tired and he was no longer able to keep himself up, he would simply hang and choke. But after all this talk of death, let's not forget to always look on the bright side of life.